My name is Sarah Chen, and 6 months ago, I stood in front of a room full of executives at Tech Vision Industries in downtown Seattle, watching my career crumble before my eyes. The rain was hammering against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 32nd floor conference room, matching the storm brewing inside my chest as I clicked through my PowerPoint presentation. I was 28 years old, fresh out of my MBA program at the University of Washington, and this was supposed to be my big break. For 3 months, I had been working as a junior consultant at Morrison & Associates, a mid-tier consulting firm that specialized in digital transformation strategies. My boss, Richard Morrison himself, had chosen me to present our revolutionary customer engagement platform to TechVision's board of directors. The conference room smelled of expensive leather and fresh coffee. Around the mahogany table sat 12 of the most powerful people in Seattle's tech industry. CEO Michael Bradford sat at the head of the table, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses. To his right was Jennifer Walsh, the Chief Technology Officer, known for her sharp tongue and even sharper business acumen. The rest of the board members represented a who's who of venture capitalists, former tech executives, and industry veterans. I had rehearsed this presentation countless times. My proposal centered around an AI-driven customer relationship management system that could predict consumer behavior with 94% accuracy. The technology existed, the market research was solid, and the potential ROI was astronomical. On paper, it was perfect. "Good morning, everyone," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "Today, I'm excited to present a game-changing solution that will revolutionize how TechVision connects with its customers." I clicked to my first slide, which displayed colorful charts and graphs showing customer engagement trends. The room was silent, but I could feel the weight of their attention. I launched into my carefully crafted opening, explaining the current market landscape and the challenges facing customer retention in the tech industry. Everything was going smoothly until I reached slide 15. This was where I planned to demonstrate our AI algorithm in action using real customer data from a similar company. I had spent weeks preparing this demo, creating mock scenarios that would showcase the system's predictive capabilities. "Now let me show you how our AI can predict customer behavior," I said, clicking to the next slide. Instead of my carefully prepared demonstration, what appeared on the screen was a slide filled with lorem ipsum text and placeholder images of cats wearing business suits. My heart stopped. The room fell silent except for the sound of rain against the windows. I clicked frantically, hoping it was just a loading error, but slide after slide showed the same placeholder content. Somehow, in all my preparations, I had uploaded the wrong version of the presentation. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then, from somewhere in the room, I heard a snicker. It started small, but like a spark catching dry kindling, it spread. Jennifer Walsh covered her mouth, trying to suppress a laugh. One of the venture capitalists, a man named David Kruger, didn't even try to hide his amusement. "Are you seriously showing us cats in business suits as your revolutionary AI demonstration?" David asked, his voice dripping with condescension. The laughter grew louder. Even Michael Bradford, who I had heard was known for his professionalism, cracked a smile. I stood there, frozen, my face burning with embarrassment as 12 of the most successful people in Seattle's tech scene laughed at my expense. There seems to be a technical issue," I stammered, frantically clicking through slides, hoping to find something salvageable. "Technical issue?" Jennifer Walsh chimed in, barely containing her laughter. "Or is this your actual proposal? Because I have to say, the cat in the corner office is quite fetching." The room erupted in laughter again. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. This was supposed to be my moment, my chance to prove that I belonged in the big leagues. Instead, I was standing there like a deer in headlights, being mocked by some of the most influential people in the industry. Michael Bradford finally raised his hand, and the room quieted. "Ms. Chen, I think we've seen enough for today. Perhaps you should go back to Morrison & Associates and prepare something more substantial." The dismissal in his voice was clear. I gathered my things, mumbled an apology, and walked out of that conference room with whatever dignity I had left. The sound of their continued chuckling followed me all the way to the elevator. The ride down to the lobby felt like the longest 32 floors of my life. I stared at my reflection in the polished steel doors, seeing a young Asian American woman who looked completely defeated. My black blazer, which I had chosen specifically to look professional and confident, now felt like a costume I was wearing badly. My shoulder-length hair, which I had styled perfectly that morning, was now slightly disheveled from running my hands through it in frustration. When I finally made it outside, the Seattle rain hit me immediately. I didn't have an umbrella, and within minutes, I was soaked through. The irony wasn't lost on me. Even the weather seemed to be against me that day. I took the bus back to Morrison & Associates, dreading the conversation I would have to have with Richard. Our office was in a converted warehouse in the Belltown district, trying to capture that startup vibe despite being a traditional consulting firm. The exposed brick walls and industrial lighting that usually inspired me now felt cold and unwelcoming. Richard was waiting for me in his office, and I could tell from his expression that he had already received a call from Tech Vision. He was a man in his mid-50s with graying temples and the kind of confidence that came from decades in the business world. Usually, he was supportive and encouraging, but today his disappointment was palpable. "Sarah, sit down," he said without looking up from his computer. "I just got off the phone with Michael Bradford." I sat in the chair across from his desk, my wet clothes making me shiver. "Richard, I can explain—" "No need," he interrupted. "Bradford told me about the presentation." "The cats, Sarah? Really? It was an honest mistake. I must have uploaded the wrong file. The real presentation was incredibly solid. If I could just get another chance—" "There won't be another chance," Richard said firmly. "Not with Tech Vision, and frankly, not with Morrison & Associates. This kind of mistake reflects poorly on all of us. I'm going to have to let you go." The words hit me like a physical blow. In the span of 2 hours, I had gone from rising star to unemployed laughingstock. I tried to argue, to explain how much work I had put into the real presentation, but Richard's mind was made up. By the end of the day, I was cleaning out my desk while my former colleagues watched with a mixture of sympathy and relief that it wasn't them. That night, I sat in my small Capitol Hill apartment, surrounded by boxes of my professional life, and cried. The apartment wasn't much, a studio with a Murphy bed and a kitchenette that barely qualified as functional, but it had been my launching pad for what I thought would be a successful career in consulting. Now it just felt like a reminder of my failure. I had moved to Seattle from San Francisco 2 years earlier, drawn by the city's reputation as a tech hub and the promise of opportunity. My parents, both immigrants from Taiwan who had worked tirelessly to put me through school, had been so proud when I landed the job at Morrison & Associates. Now I would have to call them and explain how I had managed to destroy my career with a PowerPoint presentation. The next few days were a blur of self-pity and job searching. I sent out dozens of resumes, but word travels fast in Seattle's tight-knit tech community. The story of the cat presentation had already made its rounds, and I found myself being politely declined by companies that had shown interest in me just weeks before. But as I sat there that Friday evening, eating takeout Chinese food and scrolling through job listings that seemed increasingly desperate, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was my parents' work ethic finally kicking in, or maybe it was just stubborn pride, but I realized that wallowing wasn't going to solve anything. I opened my laptop and began working on the presentation that should have been shown that day. Not to apply for jobs, but to prove to myself that I wasn't the incompetent consultant those executives thought I was. I had a good idea, and I was going to make it work, with or without Tech Vision's approval. As the Seattle skyline twinkled outside my window, I began to rebuild not just my presentation, but my entire approach to the customer engagement problem. I didn't know it then, but that humiliating day at Tech Vision was about to become the catalyst for the most important chapter of my professional life. 3 weeks after my disaster at Tech Vision, I was still unemployed but no longer unemployable, at least not in my own mind. I had spent every waking hour refining my customer engagement platform concept, diving deeper into the technology than I ever had while working at Morrison & Associates. My small apartment had transformed into a makeshift research lab. I had covered every available wall space with printed articles, market research, flowcharts, and sticky notes, creating a web of connections that would have made a detective proud. The Murphy bed stayed down most days because I was working from it, my laptop balanced on my knees as I coded, researched, and refined my ideas. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday morning. I was reviewing customer data patterns from 3 different industries when I noticed something that had been hiding in plain sight. The AI algorithm I had been developing didn't just predict customer behavior, it could identify the emotional triggers that drove purchasing decisions with unprecedented accuracy. Traditional customer relationship management systems focused on transactional data: what customers bought, when they bought it, how much they spent. But my system was different. It analyzed communication patterns, response times to marketing emails, website browsing behavior, and even social media engagement to create an emotional fingerprint for each customer. I called it the Emotional Intelligence Customer Engagement System, or EICES for short. It wasn't just about predicting what customers would buy, it was about understanding why they wanted to buy it and when they would be most receptive to making that purchase. The more I worked on EICES, the more excited I became. This wasn't just an incremental improvement on existing technology, it was a paradigm shift. I began reaching out to small businesses in Seattle, offering to test my system for free in exchange for access to their customer data. My first client was Maria Rodriguez, who owned a small chain of 3 coffee shops in the University District. Maria had been struggling with customer retention and was spending too much money on marketing campaigns that weren't generating results. She was skeptical when I approached her, but desperate enough to try anything. "You're the girl who showed cats to TechVision's board, right?" she asked when I met her at her flagship location near the University of Washington campus. The smell of freshly ground coffee beans filled the air, and the morning rush was in full swing around us. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. "Yes, that was me. But I promise you, this is different. This is the real thing." Maria studied me for a moment, taking in my obviously limited budget wardrobe and the determination in my eyes. "Okay, Sarah, show me what you've got." I spent the next 2 hours walking Maria through EICES, explaining how it could analyze her customers' emotional states and preferences. The system could identify which customers were likely to try new menu items, who responded best to loyalty program incentives, and even which customers were at risk of switching to competitors. "This is either brilliant or complete nonsense," Maria said when I finished my presentation. "But you know what? My current marketing isn't working anyway. Let's try it." For the next month, I practically lived at Maria's coffee shops. I installed my monitoring software, analyzed customer data, and fine-tuned the algorithm based on real-world results. The work was exhausting, but I could see the system working in real time. EICES identified that customers who ordered complicated drinks during stressful periods, like finals week at the university, were 73% more likely to respond to comfort-themed marketing messages. It discovered that regular customers who suddenly started ordering simpler drinks were often dealing with budget constraints and would respond well to targeted discount offers. Most importantly, it predicted which customers were likely to become regular clients based on their first 3 visits. The results were undeniable. Within 6 weeks, Maria's customer retention had improved by 34%, and her targeted marketing campaigns were generating 3 times the response rate of her previous efforts. Word began to spread through Seattle's small business community about the young consultant who had been laughed out of TechVision but was producing remarkable results for local entrepreneurs. My second client was James Patterson, who ran a small automotive repair shop in the Fremont neighborhood. James had heard about my work with Maria through a mutual friend and was curious about whether EICs could work outside the food service industry. "I don't know much about all this computer stuff," James admitted as we sat in his cluttered office surrounded by car parts and maintenance manuals. "But if you can help me understand my customers better, I'm willing to listen." Automotive repair presented unique challenges. Customers didn't visit regularly like coffee shop patrons, and their emotional states were often influenced by the stress of car problems and unexpected expenses. But EICS adapted beautifully to this new environment. The system identified patterns that James had never noticed. Customers who called multiple times before scheduling an appointment were often price shopping and needed reassurance about value rather than just low prices. Customers who brought their cars in for minor issues during the first 6 months of ownership were likely to become long-term clients if handled with extra care and education about preventive maintenance. Most surprisingly, EICS discovered that customers who complained the most about wait times were actually the most likely to recommend the shop to friends, but only if their complaints were acknowledged and addressed promptly. "This is incredible," James told me after 2 months of using the system. "I've been in this business for 20 years, and I thought I knew my customers. but your system is showing me things I never would have noticed. James's customer satisfaction scores improved dramatically, and his referral rates increased by 45%. More importantly for me, he was so impressed with the results that he started introducing me to other small business owners in the area. As my client base grew, so did my confidence. I was working 18-hour days, but for the first time since the Tech Vision disaster, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. ESIS was no longer just a theoretical concept. It was a proven system that was helping real businesses solve real problems. But the more successful I became with small businesses, the more I realized that I was thinking too small. ESIS had the potential to revolutionize customer engagement for companies of all sizes, not just local coffee shops and repair garages. Late one evening, as I sat in my apartment reviewing the success metrics from my current clients, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to take EISES to the big leagues, whether they were ready for me or not. I opened my laptop and began preparing for the most important presentation of my life. This time, there would be no cats in business suits, no technical mishaps, no room for mockery. I was going to show the Seattle tech community what they had dismissed 6 months ago. The rain continued to fall outside my window, but this time it felt like a cleansing rather than a punishment. I had learned more about business, technology, and myself in the past few months than I had in all my years of formal education. The girl who had been laughed out of Tech Vision was gone, replaced by a woman who had built something remarkable from the ashes of her humiliation. As I worked through the night, refining my strategy and preparing for what would come next, I couldn't help but smile. They had laughed at my presentation, but they weren't laughing anymore. Soon, they would be asking me for a job. By December, 6 months after my humiliation at Tech Vision, EISES was generating real buzz in Seattle's business community. I had 17 small and medium-sized clients, and my system was consistently delivering results that traditional customer engagement platforms couldn't match. But I knew that to truly validate what I had built, I needed to prove it worked at enterprise level. The opportunity came from an unexpected source. Dr. Amanda Foster, a professor of business analytics at the University of Washington, had been following my work through one of her former students who worked at James Patterson's auto shop. She reached out to me with a proposition that would change everything. "Sarah, I've been hearing remarkable things about your system," Dr. Foster said, as we sat in her office overlooking the UW campus quad. The trees were bare, and a light snow was beginning to fall, creating a perfect winter scene outside her window. "I'd like to feature ESIS as a case study in my graduate-level course on innovative business solutions." Dr. Foster was well connected in Seattle's tech industry and served on the advisory boards of several major corporations. More importantly, she had a reputation for identifying breakthrough technologies before they became mainstream. Her endorsement could open doors that had been firmly closed to me since the Tech Vision incident. "But," she continued, "I'll need you to present EICS to a panel of industry experts and graduate students. Think of it as a thesis defense, but with real-world implications." My stomach churned at the thought of another presentation, but I knew this was the opportunity I had been working toward. When would this presentation take place? January 15th. I've already confirmed attendance from several prominent figures in the local tech scene, including some people from Tech Vision. The irony was not lost on me. 6 months after being laughed out of Tech Vision's boardroom, I would be presenting to some of those same people again. But this time, I had more than just slides and theories. I had proven results. I spent the next month preparing more thoroughly than I had ever prepared for anything in my life. I created detailed case studies from each of my clients, complete with before and after metrics, customer testimonials, and financial impact analyses. I built a live demonstration using sanitized data from Maria's coffee shops that would show EISES in real-time action. Most importantly, I prepared for every possible question, objection, and technical challenge. The presentation was scheduled for 2 p.m. in Kane Hall, one of UW's largest lecture auditoriums. As I arrived that morning, I saw familiar cars in the parking lot, luxury vehicles that I recognized from my previous life in the consulting world. My own transportation, an aging Toyota Corolla that I had bought used with my savings, looked modest in comparison, but it had gotten me here, and that was what mattered. Dr. Foster had arranged for the presentation to be filmed, both for her class archives and to share with industry contacts who couldn't attend in person. The stakes couldn't have been higher. At 1:45 p.m., I stood outside Kane Hall, watching through the glass doors as people filed into the auditorium. I recognized several faces from TechVision, including Jennifer Walsh and David Kruger, the same executives who had laughed at my cat slides 6 months earlier. My hands were shaking, but not from nerves, from excitement. I had been waiting for this moment. "Sarah, are you ready?" Dr. Foster asked, approaching me with a warm smile. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life," I replied, and I meant it. The auditorium was packed with about 150 people, graduate students, professors, and industry professionals. Dr. Foster introduced me, briefly mentioning my background, but focusing primarily on the innovative work I had been doing with local businesses. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sarah Chen, founder and developer of the Emotional Intelligence Customer Engagement System." I walked to the podium with confidence I had never felt before. The stage lights were bright, but I could see faces in the audience clearly. Jennifer Walsh was sitting in the third row, her expression skeptical but attentive. David Kruger sat further back, arms crossed, looking as condescending as I remembered. "6 months ago, I stood in front of some of you and failed spectacularly," I began, my voice strong and clear. "Today, I'm going to show you why that failure was the best thing that ever happened to me, and why it led to a breakthrough that's going to change how businesses understand their customers." I clicked to my first slide, which showed a simple graph comparing traditional customer analytics with emotional intelligence analytics. No cats this time, just clean, professional graphics that told a compelling story. Traditional CRM systems tell us what customers do. EICs tells us why they do it, when they're most likely to do it again, and how to make them feel understood rather than marketed to. I walked them through the theoretical foundation of EICS, explaining how emotional triggers drive purchasing decisions and how my system identified and leveraged these patterns. But theory was just the beginning. I had 17 case studies to share. "Let me show you how this works in practice," I said, clicking to a detailed analysis of Maria's coffee shops. This client was spending $3,000 per month on traditional marketing with a 2.1% response rate. After implementing ICES, their response rate increased to 6.7%, and their customer retention improved by 34%. I could see people in the audience taking notes, leaning forward with interest. Even Jennifer Walsh had uncrossed her arms and was paying attention. But the real magic happened when I launched into the live demonstration. I had connected ICES to a test dataset that simulated real customer interactions. As the audience watched, the system analyzed customer communication patterns, identified emotional states, and suggested personalized engagement strategies in real time. "Watch what happens when we introduce a customer who has been experiencing financial stress," I said, manipulating the test data. ECs doesn't just see decreased spending, it identifies the emotional markers that indicate financial anxiety and suggests value-focused messaging rather than premium product promotions. The system worked flawlessly. Customer after customer, scenario after scenario, ECs demonstrated its ability to understand not just what customers were doing, but why they were doing it and how businesses should respond. "But the real proof," I continued, "is in the results. My clients have seen an average improvement of 41% in customer retention, 67% increase in marketing response rates, and 23% growth in customer lifetime value. These aren't projections or theories, these are real results from real businesses." When I finished the demonstration portion of my presentation, the room was silent. But this wasn't the uncomfortable silence of 6 months ago. This was the silence of people processing something significant. Dr. Foster opened the floor for questions, and hands shot up throughout the auditorium. Graduate students asked about the technical architecture. Professors inquired about the research methodology. Industry professionals wanted to know about scalability and implementation challenges. I answered every question confidently, drawing on months of real-world experience with ECs. This wasn't theoretical anymore. I had lived with this system, refined it through trial and error, and proven its effectiveness across multiple industries. Then, Jennifer Walsh raised her hand. "Ms. Chen," she said, standing up in the third row, "I have to admit, when I heard you were presenting here today, I was skeptical. The last time we met, Well, she paused, and a few people in the audience chuckled knowingly. But what you've shown us today is remarkable. The question I have is about scalability. These are impressive results with small businesses, but can ECs handle the complexity and volume of enterprise-level customer data? It was exactly the question I had been hoping someone would ask. I'm glad you asked that, Ms. Walsh, I replied. EISIS was designed from the beginning to scale. The algorithm becomes more accurate with larger datasets, not less. In fact, I believe it would be most powerful when applied to the customer base of a company like TechVision. The auditorium buzzed with quiet conversation. I had just directly addressed the elephant in the room and positioned EISIS as a solution for the company that had dismissed me months earlier. David Kruger raised his hand next. Ms. Chen, assuming your system works as advertised, what would implementation look like for a major technology company? What kind of resources would be required? Implementation would require a dedicated team of data scientists and customer experience specialists, I replied. Someone would need to lead that team. Someone who understands both the technical architecture and the business applications. Someone who has proven they can deliver results. I looked directly at him as I said it. The implication was clear. I wasn't just selling a system, I was positioning myself as the person to implement it. The questions continued for another 30 minutes, but I could feel the energy in the room shifting. What had started as academic curiosity had evolved into genuine business interest. People were no longer asking if ESIS worked, they were asking how they could get access to it. As the formal presentation concluded, I was surrounded by people wanting to continue the conversation. Business cards were exchanged, meetings were scheduled, and partnership discussions began. But the most significant moment came when Jennifer Walsh approached me directly. Sarah, I need to speak with you privately, she said. Would you be available to meet at TechVision tomorrow morning? As I drove home that evening through the Seattle streets I had come to know so well, I reflected on how much had changed since that humiliating day in TechVision's conference room. The same roads, the same rain, the same city, but I was completely different. My phone had been buzzing constantly with follow-up calls and meeting requests. EKIS wasn't just a successful presentation anymore. It was the foundation of what was about to become a very different kind of career. I had proven that failure could be transformed into success, that humiliation could become motivation, and that sometimes the best way to join the establishment is to prove it wrong first. Tomorrow, I would walk back into TechVision, but this time, they would be asking me for something. The next morning, I stood in the lobby of TechVision Industries, but everything felt different. 6 months ago, I had entered this building as a nervous junior consultant carrying someone else's authority. Today, I walked in as the founder of a proven technology system, carrying my own power. The receptionist recognized me immediately. Ms. Chen, Ms. Walsh is expecting you. She asked me to escort you to the executive conference room. As we rode the elevator to the 32nd floor, I caught my reflection in the polished steel doors. I was wearing the same black blazer I had worn to my disastrous presentation, but it fit differently now. I carried myself differently. The woman looking back at me was confident, accomplished, and ready for whatever came next. The executive conference room was the same one where I had been humiliated 6 months earlier. The mahogany table gleamed under the morning sun, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. But instead of 12 intimidating board members, only Jennifer Walsh was waiting for me, along with 2 people I didn't recognize. Sarah, thank you for coming, Jennifer said, standing to greet me. Her demeanor was completely different from our last meeting, professional, respectful, and genuinely interested. I'd like you to meet Tom Bradley, our Chief Innovation Officer, and Lisa Park, who heads our Customer Experience Division. We shook hands and took seats around the table. Jennifer wasted no time getting to the point. Sarah, your presentation yesterday was impressive. More than impressive. It was exactly what we've been looking for. TechVision has been struggling with customer engagement for the past 2 years. Our traditional CRM systems are generating data, but they're not generating insights. We're spending millions on customer acquisition, but our retention rates are declining. Tom Bradley leaned forward. We've tried several solutions from major vendors, but they're all variations on the same theme. More data, more automation, more complexity. What you've built is different. It's intuitive. Lisa Park nodded in agreement. The emotional intelligence component is revolutionary. We've been trying to understand why our customers make the decisions they do, but we've been looking at the wrong metrics. I listened carefully. processing not just what they were saying, but what they weren't saying. They needed ICs, but more importantly, they needed someone who understood how to implement it effectively. I appreciate your interest, I said finally. But I have to ask, what's changed since my last visit to this room? 6 months ago, you dismissed my ideas before I could even present them properly. Jennifer looked uncomfortable for a moment. Sarah, I owe you an apology for how that meeting went. We were unprofessional. But in our defense, your presentation that day didn't reflect the quality of thinking you demonstrated yesterday. The presentation that day was a technical mishap, I replied, but the ideas were the same. The difference is that now I have 17 successful implementations proving that those ideas work. Tom Bradley spoke up. Which brings us to why we asked you here. We want to license ESES for TechVision's customer base. We're prepared to offer a substantial licensing fee, plus revenue sharing, based on the performance improvements you deliver. I had expected this offer, but I had also spent considerable time thinking about what I actually wanted from this conversation. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I'm not interested in licensing ICs to TechVision. The three executives exchanged surprised glances. Jennifer was the first to respond. I'm sorry, I don't understand. Isn't that why you're here? I'm here because you asked me to be here, I replied calmly. But if you want access to EKIS and the expertise to implement it successfully, licensing isn't the right model. I opened my laptop and pulled up a presentation I had prepared the night before. Unlike my previous presentations to TechVision, this one was about business strategy, not technology demonstrations. ECS isn't just software, it's a completely new approach to customer engagement. Licensing the technology without the strategic framework and implementation expertise would be like buying a Formula One race car without hiring a driver who knows how to use it. I clicked to my first slide, which showed the organizational structure I was proposing. What I'm suggesting is that TechVision create a new division focused on emotional intelligence customer engagement, with me as the Director of Customer Intelligence Innovation. This division would implement EICs across all of TechVision's customer touchpoints while continuing to refine and expand the system's capabilities. Lisa Park leaned back in her chair. You're proposing that we hire you to run a new division based on your technology? I'm proposing that you invest in a proven system and the expertise to maximize its potential, I corrected. The question is whether TechVision wants to be a leader in the next generation of customer engagement or continue struggling with outdated approaches. The room fell silent as the three executives processed my proposal. I could see them weighing the audacity of my suggestion against the potential benefits of what I was offering. Tom Bradley broke the silence. Sarah, what you're proposing would require a significant investment and organizational restructuring. We'd need approval from the full board of directors. I understand, I replied, but consider the alternative. Customer engagement technology is evolving rapidly. ICs gives TechVision a 2-year head start on the competition, but only if it's implemented properly. In 6 months, one of your competitors will either develop something similar or hire me to build it for them. It was a calculated risk, but I could see the impact of my words. These were business people who understood competitive advantage and market timing. Jennifer Walsh studied me carefully. You've certainly grown confident since our last meeting. I've had 6 months to prove that my ideas work, I replied. Confidence based on results isn't arrogance, it's just good business sense. The meeting continued for another hour as we discussed implementation timelines, budget requirements, and organizational structures. The executives asked detailed questions about scalability, technical requirements, and performance metrics. I answered each question drawing on my real-world experience with EKS implementations. Finally, Jennifer stood up. Sarah, we need to discuss this internally and present your proposal to our board of directors. Can you give us a week to make a decision? Of course, I replied, gathering my materials. But I should mention that I have meetings scheduled with 3 other major technology companies next week. The Customer Engagement Challenge isn't unique to TechVision. As I prepared to leave, Tom Bradley asked one final question. Sarah, assuming we move forward with your proposal, what would success look like for TechVision? I paused at the door and looked back at the 3 executives sitting around the table where I had been humiliated 6 months earlier. Success would look like TechVision becoming the gold standard for customer engagement in the technology industry. Your customer retention rates would improve by at least 35%, your marketing efficiency would double, and your customer lifetime value would increase by a minimum of 25%. But more importantly, you'd understand your customers in a way that your competitors can't match. And for you personally? Jennifer asked. I smiled. For me, success would look like proving that sometimes the best way to get the job you want is to create it yourself. As I rode the elevator down from the 32nd floor, I reflected on how completely the situation had reversed. 6 months ago, I had left this building as a failed consultant. Today, I was leaving as an entrepreneur who had just proposed creating a new division at one of Seattle's most prominent technology companies. The call came 3 days later. Jennifer Walsh's voice was professional, but warm when she delivered the news. Sarah, the board has approved your proposal. We'd like to offer you the position of Director of Customer Intelligence Innovation, along with the budget and authority to build the division you outlined. When can you start? As I hung up the phone, I looked around my small Capitol Hill apartment, the same space where I had wallowed in self-pity after my humiliation, where I had rebuilt my confidence line by line of code, where I had created something remarkable from the ashes of failure. Within a month, I would be moving to a larger place in Belltown, closer to TechVision's offices. Within 6 months, I would be managing a team of 12 specialists and implementing EISES across TechVision's entire customer base. Within a year, the system would be generating results that exceeded even my most optimistic projections. But as I sat there in my modest apartment that evening, I realized that the real transformation hadn't been professional. It had been personal. The woman who walked into TechVision that morning was someone I hadn't been 6 months earlier. She was confident without being arrogant, ambitious without being ruthless, and successful on her own terms. They had laughed at my presentation, dismissed my ideas, and sent me away humiliated. But that humiliation had forced me to prove my worth in the real world, with real clients and real results. Now, they weren't just offering me a job. They were asking me to lead their transformation into the future of customer engagement. Sometimes the most important doors are the ones that get slammed in your face first. Sometimes the best revenge is simply succeeding so completely that revenge becomes irrelevant. And sometimes the biggest favor someone can do for you is to underestimate you completely. 1 year later, I stood in the same TechVision conference room where my career had almost ended. But this time, I was leading the quarterly board meeting. My Customer Intelligence Innovation division had exceeded every performance metric we had established. Customer retention was up 42%, marketing efficiency had improved by 89%, and customer lifetime value had increased by 31%. More importantly, EICAS had evolved far beyond my original conception. My team had developed new applications for employee engagement, product development insights, and even strategic planning. What had started as a customer relationship management system had become a comprehensive emotional intelligence platform that was transforming how TechVision operated at every level. Michael Bradford, the CEO who had dismissed me a year earlier, was now one of ESES's biggest advocates. Sarah's division has become our competitive advantage, he told the board. We're not just keeping customers, we're creating advocates. Our customer satisfaction scores are the highest in the industry. Jennifer Walsh, who was now one of my strongest allies within the company, presented the financial impact of my division. The ROI on our investment in customer intelligence innovation has been extraordinary. We've not only recouped our initial investment, but we're generating additional revenue of $3 million per quarter directly attributable to ECAS implementations. But the most satisfying moment came when David Kruger, the venture capitalist who had been most dismissive during my original presentation, raised his hand during the Q&A session. Sarah, I have to ask, what's next for ECAS? Have you considered spinning it off as a separate company? I think there could be significant venture capital interest in this technology. The irony was perfect. The man who had mocked my cat slides was now asking to invest in the company I could build around the ideas he had ridiculed. Thank you for the question, David, I replied, maintaining complete professionalism despite the sweet taste of vindication. EISES has certainly proven its market potential, but my commitment right now is to TechVision and to continuing to push the boundaries of emotional intelligence in business applications. After the meeting, I returned to my office on the 28th floor, 4 floors below where I had been humiliated, but in many ways a world away from that experience. My office overlooked Elliott Bay, and on clear days, I could see the Olympic Mountains in the distance. The walls were covered with awards, success metrics, and photos from team-building events with the 12 brilliant specialists I had hired to help implement ECAs across TechVision's operations. My assistant knocked on the door. "Sarah, there's a young woman here to see you. She says she's a recent MBA graduate looking for advice about consulting careers." "Send her in," I said, curious about who would be seeking my advice. The woman who entered my office reminded me immediately of myself a year earlier. She was probably in her mid-20s, professionally dressed, carrying a portfolio that clearly contained resumes and work samples. But there was something in her eyes that I recognized, the combination of ambition and uncertainty that comes with being at the beginning of a career. "Ms. Chen, thank you so much for seeing me," she said, extending her hand. "My name is Jessica Martinez. I graduated from the Foster School of Business last month, and I heard about your presentation disaster and incredible comeback. I was hoping you might have some advice for someone just starting out in the consulting world." I gestured for her to sit in the chair across from my desk, the same type of chair where I had sat in Richard Morrison's office when he fired me. "What specifically would you like to know, Jessica?" "Well, I've been interviewing with consulting firms, but I keep getting rejected. My grades are good, my recommendations are strong, but somehow I'm not connecting with the interviewers. I'm starting to wonder if I'm just not cut out for this industry." I studied Jessica's face and saw my younger self, talented but inexperienced, confident in her abilities but shaken by rejection, not yet understanding that the path to success is rarely linear. "Tell me about a time when you failed at something important," I said. Jessica looked surprised by the question. "I'm sorry?" "Failure," I repeated. "Tell me about a time when you failed at something that mattered to you, and what you learned from that experience." Jessica thought for a moment. "Well, in my junior year, I was leading a team project for our strategic management class. I had prepared extensively, created detailed project plans, assigned roles to team members. But when it came time to present, our data analysis was completely wrong. We had made a fundamental error in our market research methodology, and our entire conclusion was invalid. The professor called it the worst presentation he had seen in 5 years. How did that make you feel? Humiliated? Embarrassed? Like maybe I wasn't as smart as I thought I was? And what did you do next?" I spent the next week going through every step of our analysis, identifying where we went wrong. Then, I approached the professor and asked if I could redo the project individually for partial credit. He said no initially, but I persisted. I eventually convinced him to let me present a corrected analysis to the class, acknowledging our mistakes and showing the right methodology. I smiled. "And how did that second presentation go?" "It was actually really well received. Several classmates told me later that they learned more from my mistake analysis than they had from most of our other presentations. The professor ended up using my corrected methodology as an example in future classes." "Jessica, that story tells me more about your potential than any GPA or recommendation letter could. You experienced failure, took responsibility for it, learned from it, and turned it into a teaching moment for others. That's exactly the kind of resilience and growth mindset that leads to success in this industry." I leaned back in my chair and continued. "The consulting firms that are rejecting you right now are probably looking for candidates who fit a certain mold, people who have succeeded at everything they've attempted, who interview perfectly, who have never experienced significant failure. But those aren't necessarily the people who become great consultants." "I don't understand," Jessica said. "Great consultants understand failure because they've experienced it personally. They know how to help clients navigate difficult situations because they've navigated difficult situations themselves. They have empathy for struggling businesses because they remember what it felt like to struggle personally." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline that had witnessed my own transformation. A year ago, I was sitting in a conference room 4 floors above us, watching my career implode in front of 12 of the most successful people in Seattle. They laughed at me, dismissed me, and sent me away. But that humiliation forced me to prove my ideas in the real world instead of just in presentations. It made me stronger, more creative, and ultimately more successful than I ever would have been if that presentation had gone perfectly. Jessica was listening intently. "So you're saying that failure can actually be an advantage?" "I'm saying that how you respond to failure determines whether it becomes an advantage or a permanent setback. The consulting firms that are rejecting you now might be doing you a favor. Maybe instead of trying to fit into their mold, you should be creating your own path. I returned to my desk and pulled out a business card. Jessica, I'm starting a new initiative to help small businesses implement emotional intelligence systems. It's not traditional consulting, but it's an opportunity to build something meaningful while developing real-world experience. Would you be interested in learning more? Jessica's eyes lit up. Absolutely. But can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever think about what would have happened if your original presentation at Tech Vision had gone perfectly? If you had never experienced that humiliation? I considered her question carefully. I think about it sometimes, and honestly, I think I would have had a very different career. Probably successful by conventional standards, but nowhere near as fulfilling or impactful. That disaster forced me to discover what I was truly capable of when everything was on the line. As Jessica left my office that afternoon, I reflected on how completely my perspective had changed over the past year. The experience that had once felt like the end of my career had actually been the beginning of something much more significant. 6 months later, Jessica Martinez became the first hire for my new consulting division, focused on helping small and medium-sized businesses implement emotional intelligence systems. She brought the same resilience and creativity to her work that had emerged from her own experience with failure. And 18 months after that humiliating day in Tech Vision's conference room, I received a call from Harvard Business School. They wanted to create a case study around EKIS and my approach to turning professional failure into entrepreneurial success. The case study would be taught to MBA students as an example of innovative thinking and resilient leadership. As I hung up the phone after accepting Harvard's invitation, I looked around my office one more time. The awards on the walls, the view of Elliott Bay, the photos of my successful team, all of it had grown from the seeds of that terrible presentation day. They had laughed at my presentation, and now they were asking me for a job. But more than that, they were asking me to teach others how to transform their own failures into foundations for success. Sometimes the most important question isn't how to avoid failure, but how to fail forward into something better than you ever imagined possible. Sometimes the laughter that hurts the most is just the prelude to applause that means everything. And sometimes the best revenge really is living so well that revenge becomes irrelevant and success becomes service to others, walking the same difficult path you once traveled yourself. The rain continued to fall outside my office window, but I no longer heard it as criticism. Now it sounded like possibility. 2 years after my Harvard Business School case study was published, I received an invitation that would bring my journey completely full circle. The Seattle Tech Innovation Awards wanted to honor me with their Entrepreneur of the Year award, and the ceremony would be held at the Washington State Convention Center, the same venue where I had attended my first professional networking event as a junior consultant at Morrison & Associates. The irony wasn't lost on me as I prepared for the awards ceremony. I stood in my walk-in closet in my new Belltown penthouse, selecting an outfit for an event where I would be celebrated by the same community that had once dismissed me. The black blazer that had witnessed both my humiliation and my comeback hung in the closet like a talisman. But tonight called for something different. I chose a midnight blue dress that projected confidence without arrogance, success without ostentation. As I applied my makeup, I thought about all the versions of myself that had led to this moment. The eager junior consultant, the humiliated failure, the determined entrepreneur, the innovative director, and now the recognized leader in emotional intelligence business applications. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica Martinez, who was now running her own consulting firm focused on helping startups implement emotional intelligence frameworks. Sarah, I'll be watching the live stream tonight. So proud of everything you've accomplished. Remember, failure is just success in progress. I smiled at her message. Jessica had become more than just a mentee. She had become a friend and a successful entrepreneur in her own right. Her consulting firm, Empathic Solutions, was already working with 37 startups across the Pacific Northwest, and she had just signed her first Fortune 500 client. The awards ceremony was a black tie affair attended by 500 of Seattle's most influential business leaders, tech innovators, and venture capitalists. As my car pulled up to the convention center, I could see the red carpet and photographers capturing the arrivals of various honorees and industry celebrities. But before I could focus on the ceremony, I had one important stop to make. Earlier that day, I had arranged to meet with someone who had played a crucial role in my journey, though he probably didn't realize it. Richard Morrison was waiting for me in the lobby of the Four Seasons Hotel, looking older but still carrying himself with the confidence that had once intimidated me so much. When he had fired me from Morrison and Associates 2 years earlier, I had felt like my world was ending. Now, seeing him again, I realized how much that moment had shaped everything that followed. "Sarah," he said, standing to greet me, "you look successful." We sat in comfortable chairs overlooking Elliott Bay, the same view I had from my Tech Vision office, but from a different perspective. "Richard, I wanted to thank you," I said, getting straight to the point. He looked puzzled. "Thank me? For firing you?" "For firing me at exactly the right moment," I replied. "If you had given me another chance, if you had let me stay at Morrison and Associates and gradually rebuild my reputation, I never would have been forced to prove my ideas in the real world. I would have remained a competent consultant, but I never would have become an innovator." Richard studied my face carefully. "You know, Sarah, I've followed your career over the past 2 years. What you've built with EICS is remarkable. I have to admit, there have been times when I wondered if I made the right decision letting you go." "You made the perfect decision," I assured him. "Not just for me, but for Morrison and Associates. My ideas were too big for a traditional consulting firm. They needed space to grow, and that space only opened up when I was forced to create it myself." We talked for another 30 minutes about the changes in the consulting industry, the growth of emotional intelligence applications in business, and the evolution of customer engagement strategies. As our conversation concluded, Richard made an offer that would have seemed impossible 2 years earlier. "Sarah, I know you're focused on Tech Vision and your own initiatives, but if you ever decide to return to consulting, Morrison and Associates would be honored to have you as a partner." I thanked him for the offer, but explained that my path had taken me in a different direction. As we said goodbye, Richard handed me his business card with a handwritten note on the back. "Sometimes the best favor a mentor can do is get out of the way. Congratulations on everything you've achieved." The awards ceremony began at 7 p.m. with cocktails and networking in the convention center's grand ballroom. The space was elegantly decorated with modern lighting and displays showcasing Seattle's innovation ecosystem. As I entered the room, I was immediately surrounded by congratulations, business card exchanges, and requests for meetings. But the most meaningful encounter came when I spotted Maria Rodriguez near the dessert station. She was wearing an elegant black dress and looked every inch the successful business owner she had become. Her coffee shop chain had expanded to 12 locations throughout the Seattle metropolitan area, and she credited ICIS with helping her understand her customers well enough to scale intelligently. "Sarah!" Maria exclaimed, embracing me warmly. "I can't believe how far we've both come since that first day when you convinced me to try your crazy computer system." "It wasn't crazy," I laughed. "It was just different. Different enough to change everything," Maria replied. "You know, I was thinking about this earlier. When you first approached me, I almost said no. You were this young woman who had just been laughed out of the biggest presentation of her career, asking me to trust you with my business data. But there was something in your eyes that convinced me to take a chance. What did you see?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Determination," Maria said without hesitation. "You weren't just trying to prove a point or rebuild your reputation. You genuinely believed that your system could help small businesses like mine succeed. That authenticity was impossible to fake." As we continued talking, I realized that Maria's perspective highlighted something important about my journey. The success of EICS hadn't just been about technical innovation or business strategy. It had been about authentic connection. The system worked because it helped businesses understand their customers' emotional needs, but it had only been developed because I had genuinely cared about solving real problems for real people. The formal ceremony began at 8 p.m., with Seattle's mayor delivering opening remarks about the city's position as a global innovation hub. Various awards were presented for categories including Startup of the Year, Innovation in Sustainability, and Community Impact Leader. Each winner delivered acceptance speeches that highlighted the collaborative nature of Seattle's tech ecosystem and the importance of supporting emerging entrepreneurs. When my category was announced, I felt a familiar nervousness that reminded me of standing outside Tech Vision's conference room 2 years earlier. But this time, the nervousness was excitement rather than fear. The Entrepreneur of the Year award recognizes an individual who has demonstrated exceptional innovation, business impact, and community leadership, the presenter announced. This year's winner has revolutionized customer engagement technology while building a successful division at one of Seattle's premier technology companies. Please welcome Sarah Chen, Director of Customer Intelligence Innovation at Tech Vision Industries. As I walked to the podium, I could see faces in the audience that had been part of my journey. Jennifer Walsh was sitting at the Tech Vision table, beaming with pride. David Kruger was at the venture capital table, applauding enthusiastically. The same man who had once mocked my presentation was now celebrating my success. Dr. Amanda Foster from the University of Washington was in the academic section, giving me a thumbs up. But the moment that took my breath away was seeing my parents in the front row. They had flown in from San Francisco specifically for this ceremony, and my mother was crying with pride. My father, who rarely showed emotion publicly, was clapping harder than anyone else in the room. "Thank you for this incredible honor," I began, my voice steady and confident. 2 years ago, I experienced what felt like the most humiliating moment of my professional life in a conference room just a few miles from here. I was laughed at, dismissed, and sent away feeling like a complete failure. The room was completely silent, hanging on every word. But that experience taught me the most important lesson of my career. Failure is not the opposite of success. It's the raw material from which success is built. Every entrepreneur in this room has experienced moments of doubt, rejection, and humiliation. The difference between those who ultimately succeed and those who give up is not the absence of failure, but the response to failure. I looked out at the audience, making eye contact with as many people as possible. ECS exists today, not in spite of my failure at Tech Vision, but because of it. That humiliation forced me to prove my ideas in the real world rather than just in presentations. It connected me with small business owners like Maria Rodriguez, who took a chance on an unproven system because she believed in the person behind it. It taught me that innovation isn't about impressing executives in conference rooms. It's about solving real problems for real people. The applause was building, but I wasn't finished. To the young entrepreneurs in this audience who are facing their own moments of doubt and rejection, I want you to know that those moments are not roadblocks. They're redirections. Sometimes the door that gets slammed in your face is pointing you toward the window you're supposed to climb through. I paused, thinking about Jessica Martinez and all the other young professionals who had reached out to me over the past 2 years seeking advice about turning setbacks into comebacks. Success is not about avoiding failure. It's about failing forward. It's about taking the lessons from every rejection, every mistake, every humiliation, and using them to build something better than you ever imagined possible. The standing ovation that followed was overwhelming. As I held the Crystal Award and looked out at 500 of Seattle's most successful business leaders applauding my journey from failure to success, I realized that the real victory wasn't the recognition or the award. It was the knowledge that I had created something meaningful from the ashes of my worst professional moment. After the ceremony, the networking reception continued until nearly midnight. I spent hours talking with aspiring entrepreneurs, established business leaders, and potential collaborators. But the conversation that meant the most came from an unexpected source. Michael Bradford, Tech Vision's CEO, approached me near the end of the evening. "Sarah, I have something I need to tell you." "Of course, Michael. What is it?" "Do you remember the day of your original presentation to our board? The one with the technical difficulties?" I smiled. "It's hard to forget." "Well, after you left that day, the board had a long discussion about what had happened. Several members felt that we had been too hasty in dismissing you. Jennifer Walsh in particular argued that your composure under pressure and your genuine passion for the subject matter suggested that you might be worth a second look." This was news to me. I had no idea. "We actually considered reaching out to you within a few weeks of that presentation, but by then, you had already been let go from Morrison & Associates and seemed to have disappeared from the consulting scene. We assumed you had left Seattle or changed careers entirely," Michael continued. "When Dr. Foster invited us to your university presentation 6 months later, Jennifer immediately recognized your name. She convinced several of us to attend not just out of curiosity, but because we had regretted how that first meeting had ended. So you didn't come to my university presentation expecting to be impressed? Honestly? We came expecting to see a modest improvement from a talented consultant who had learned from a bad experience. What we saw instead was a complete transformation, not just of your presentation skills, but of your entire approach to the problem. You had evolved from someone trying to sell us a solution to someone who had built and proven a revolutionary system. Michael's revelation reframed my entire understanding of that pivotal university presentation. I had thought I was proving myself to people who had written me off, but in reality, I was demonstrating growth to people who had already seen my potential. Michael, why are you telling me this now? Because I want you to know that your success wasn't just about overcoming our initial dismissal. It was about exceeding expectations that were already higher than you realized. The board members who laughed that day weren't laughing at your potential. They were laughing at an unfortunate technical mishap. Your ideas were always sound. Your execution just needed time to catch up to your vision. As the reception finally concluded and I prepared to leave the convention center, I reflected on how completely my perspective had shifted over the course of the evening. The story I had been telling myself for 2 years about being dismissed and disrespected, about having to prove myself to people who had written me off, was only partially true. The complete story was more nuanced and in many ways more encouraging. Yes, I had experienced a humiliating technical failure. Yes, that failure had cost me my job and my initial opportunity with TechVision. But the response to that failure had revealed character and potential that had impressed even those who had witnessed my lowest professional moment. The real transformation hadn't been about changing other people's perceptions of me. It had been about changing my own perception of what I was capable of achieving. As I drove home through the quiet Seattle streets, I thought about the young entrepreneurs who would read about my journey in business magazines, hear about it in MBA case studies, or see it referenced in motivational speeches. I hoped they would understand that the most important part of the story wasn't the dramatic comeback or the eventual recognition. It was the daily work of rebuilding confidence, proving concepts, and serving clients who took chances on unproven ideas. Success isn't a destination you arrive at after overcoming failure. It's a process of continuously transforming challenges into opportunities, setbacks into insights, and humiliation into motivation. The award I had received that night was recognition for that process, not just its outcomes. They had laughed at my presentation, and now they were asking me for a job. But more than that, they were celebrating the journey that had led from laughter to leadership, from failure to fulfillment, and from humiliation to honor. The rain had stopped, and for the first time in years, Seattle's streets were completely dry. It felt like a perfect metaphor for how far I had traveled from that stormy day when everything fell apart and everything began.